Greetings to my fellow Peace Blunderers, and today we're talking about Game 3 of the World Chess Championship 2023. And the main question for this game is, will Nepo, now high in confidence, playing as the white pieces, push for another win trying to extend this gap, or both players are going to just err on the side of caution? And I guess, judging by the title up above, we can see it's probably the latter. Now, it makes much more sense for Ding to just stay solid and chill and draw this game, wait the storm out, because after a painful loss, you're playing with the black pieces, you need to just stay stable. That's the most important thing. And next game you can play as the white pieces, and we'll see. Nepo, however, maybe could have done something better, maybe he couldn't. We'll see. Now, in the first two games, we've had some ridiculous opening moves. We had h3 from Ding, of course, on move 4 in game 2, and we had bishop takes on c6, a little bit of a delayed exchange, and Roy Lopez from Nepo. This time, however, everything very classical, everything by the book. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, d5. I'm going over this very quickly because it's super standard stuff. This is Queen's Gambit declined. Last game, this position is almost identical to what happened last game. Well, before Ding played h3. Instead, last game what happened, Ding as white played knight f3. And then d5 happened and h3 happened. This time, however, knight c3 is played on move 3, which is a move that is almost as popular as knight f3. Knight f3 is only just slightly more common, but who cares? So back to d5, and now we see takes, very common. Bishop g5, extremely common, the most popular move here. c6, which is the second most common move, only second to bishop e7, which is about to be played anyway. c6 just transposes basically, and it has a very simple idea of protecting that central pawn from the flank, very normal. We have e3, very typical move in any Queen's Gambit position when we play c4 and then we open up the bishop with e3, typical stuff. h6, very fine. Bishop retreats, bishop e7. Like I said, we're going to transpose, bishop d3. All of this is still theory, played many times. This is the so-called Reshevsky variation, named after a famous, very strong American player, Samuel Reshevsky. Castles, queen c2, rook e8, still theory, nothing deviating from the main lines. Knight g to e2, knight b to d7, castles. And after 11 moves played by white, only on the 11th move by black, we're getting some new stuff. Check this out. We've got a5. a5 is the first real attempt from Ding to mix things up a little bit. a5 is not a move that is played. Just a couple of games found in the library with a5 on move 11 in this position. The most common alternative, though, going back a little, is the very logical knight e4. A discover attacks the bishop, looking to maybe simplify the position a little bit, also to ask white the question of what are you going to do with my good knight. And usually the game proceeds like bishop takes. Of course, you've got to address that hanging bishop, and now we're getting queen retakes, of course. And with the queen retaking, we have this knight supported thrice and attacked also thrice, so there is no material to be taken there. And usually people either take the knight with the bishop or they play rook a to e1. The position is slightly better for white, but nothing major. Just like in the position with a5, white is slightly better, but nothing major. Now, what is the idea behind a5? I think that the idea is the following. If we look at the pawn structure, if you know your pawn structures, this pawn structure is the so-called Carlsbad pawn structure. Sorry, wrong color. It's the Carlsbad pawn structure, which is characterized by this queen side minority from white. You see how white has got fewer pawns on the queen side? They've got A and B pawn opposing these 3 pawns, again wrong color, on the queen side for black. You see, one of the main positional ideas in the Carlsbad structure is the minority pawn attack. So basically, we are very interested to push b4, b5 if we are allowed to. If we're not allowed to push b4, b5 straight out, it is prefaced with something like a3 as well to support the b5 push. Why do we want that in a Carlsbad pawn structure? Well, positionally, the answer is the following. If I play the move back, and let's just play a nothing move for black, and let's play b4. I know that this pawn is hanging, but just for argument's sake, play another nothing move. And we get to a position where this b pawn is threatening the c pawn. And the idea is black is rarely interested in taking that pawn because it kind of ruins their pawn structure. It undermines the pawn on the d file, and it creates a double pawn structure there. So even though in some positions it may seem like an extra pawn, it's a huge weakness. So black usually doesn't capture, white captures. So let's give a nothing move again. White takes, black takes, and now you can see the idea, I hope. Forget about the position for a second. The position is irrelevant. I'm talking about pawn structures. We now have achieved the backwards c pawn for black, which is very easy to attack with something like rook f to c1 along the semi-open file. With the minority attack, white is aiming to create a weakness in black's camp, and the c pawn is an obvious weakness. It needs defending a lot of the time, a bit of passive defending as well, and this pawn is very hard to push. So it's usually very hard to get rid of it by pushing it to d5 because white normally gets a lot of control over that square. And that is why coming back a5 makes the idea of this push less enticing and more difficult. For example, okay, now b4 is a no-no. Even if we play e3 and let's give black a nothing move, b4 automatically isn't very good because black has got just too much control over b4. So a5 kind of stops that plan if Nepo ever wanted to play it. And now we get a3 regardless. Maybe at some point Nepo is still considering that push after some preparation and after some dust settles. Also aiming to take away the b4 square. Yeah, I guess it's okay. Knight h5 now from Ding, a very good move. It's not that the knight is so good on h5, it's just that Ding is asking some questions of that bishop, and obviously Nepo has to deal with it. The bishop exchange is bound to happen, and it did happen, and it kind of simplifies the position a little bit. You know, gets rid of the bishop pair for both players, which means that the game probably is gonna be a bit slower. Anytime we get rid of the bishop pair, that means that the game is going to be just like 5% less dynamic because there are fewer long-range pieces. Now we get rook a to e1. Rook f to e1 is also fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that, I guess it's a matter of preference. It's a matter of preference where you want to put your rooks. Perhaps Nepo figured that maybe the rook on a1 isn't doing much. Nothing is going to be happening on the queen side. For some time, would rather have this rook behind the e pawn, and this rook can stay behind the f pawn. Maybe I will push the f pawn, which kind of does happen. And now we're about to see a couple of slow knight maneuvering moves, and this is honestly something that we players of lower levels can learn from these sorts of games. Usually, when we get ourselves in a position where we castled, we developed a couple of pieces, we start going for some immediate threats and dynamic decisions. I don't know, play b6, c5, or play the pawn push, even though it may not make any sense positionally. No. Sometimes you just got to chill, and even when you feel you've developed, maybe you can develop even more. And in black's position, you can certainly say you can do that, because don't forget, the knight is still on h5, this bishop is blocked, so there's some work to do still. And this is what Ding starts doing. Knight f8, opening up the bishop and aiming to remaneuver that knight to a tasty square. We get knight c1, a very interesting idea that I couldn't understand. Well, at the time it was played, but then after the following moves, I got it. So, and I will explain it in a minute. We have knight f6 now, developing the other knight. On h5, the knight is doing nothing, very sensible. And now f3. Nepo is aiming to build a center. At some point, play e4, support e4 massively. And the point of knight c1 was as well as that after we play f3, provided that the knight is still there, on e2, the e3 pawn is hanging with check, so we cannot allow that, of course. That's why knight had to move so that the rook defends the pawn and we can push f3. Makes sense, right? So that's the plan for Nepo. Knight e6 now. This knight went from here to here, basically. And now that the knight found itself on e6, blocking both attackers on the e-file, Nepo feels like it's a good idea to bring that knight back from c1 to e2. The pawn doesn't need defending, at least for now. And yeah, as we can see by the evil bar, the position is equal. It's literally all zeros. Next, Ding's move is about to unsettle this equality a little bit, but in the end, it's not going to be anything massive. Ding goes for c5, a move that may be called slightly weakening, maybe a bit too much aggression, and this is saying quite a lot about the game where a move like c5 is considered too much aggression. However, what we get is, if these pawns ever get exchanged, let's imagine that these pawns are not there on the board anymore. Black gets an isolated pawn there. And, it could be a serious weakness. It can be easily attacked along a semi-open file. So Ding has to watch it. But then again, it's nothing massive, even after Nepo plays this little intermezzo move. Nepo doesn't have to address this immediately. He plays bishop b5, which is an interesting solution, just attacking this rook, ignoring the pawn, and maintaining some tension. Doesn't have to address that in any way, shape, or form. And now that the rook is attacked, we've got a couple of viable ways to go about it. We can play bishop to g7, just blocking, and most likely these bishops are going to get exchanged off, something like bishop takes, queen takes. But this position, Ding felt, was a little bit inferior to what may happen after rook d8, just without any blocks, getting the rook away from the attack. And the logic behind it probably is that instead of the position that I just showed you a couple of seconds ago, where we had the queen on d7 right there, this pawn, like I said, may become isolated very, very soon. In fact, it can become isolated the very next move. And I guess you want to have a more stable defending piece behind it. And the rook is a far more stable defender than the queen, because the queen at some point may want to go away from defending. You don't want your queen, your most active attacking piece, to be resorted to defender of the pawn, right? So basically, yeah, good thinking. If that's what Ding was thinking, it's better to defend that pawn with the rook long term. And now Nepo does take d takes c, queen takes c5, the more active move and the more precise. Remember that this pawn is hanging yet again, now that the knight is blocking the rook again, and the pawn is hanging with check, so Nepo definitely has to take care of it, and he does, of course, with something like queen d2. Very simple defending move, protects that pawn. And now with the rook being on d8 and defending that pawn, Ding feels it's a good time to play bishop d7. He could have a couple of moves ago, but he played it just now. And Ding is basically very happy to get another bishop exchanged off the board, which does happen. And this is actually a very interesting thing. Ding takes with the knight on d7, which is an option that is a bit risky and requires a little bit calculation, because don't forget, when the knight blocks the rook from defending, this pawn is hanging. However, this is completely fine, and this is what Ding calculated, and actually knight takes d7 is the more precise move. Because this knight, when the pawn on f3 was placed, is kind of being, hampered massively. It doesn't have much of a future. So Ding figures, what if I can transfer it to the queen side, maybe do something with that? Don't forget that with the pawn on d5, this square looks very tasty for the knight. And that's what Ding is trying to do. So knight takes d7, and like I said, the pawn is attacked twice and defended only once. However, if knight takes, for example, the piece immediately drops after knight to b6. As we can see, discovered attack on the knight is attacked twice, thrice actually, defended only once, and is pinned to the queen. So there is no way to save the piece. the best thing that can be done about this is just to sacrifice the piece, at least undermining the black's pawn structure with knight f6 check, and now the queen just runs away somewhere, and it's just up a piece for black. So no. The same, well, not the same, but the similar situation with the queen takes, really. However, we don't take the queen because there is no merits in discover attacking a knight. What happens instead is just the queen takes with check, right? Don't forget that the queen on d2 was doing a very important job of defending the pawn on a3. Now it doesn't anymore. So yeah, knight takes d7, a very precise, a very impressive move. Sometimes in a rapid game, in a blitz game, you are scared of moves like these because you don't necessarily have the time to calculate. But here, come on, you've got 2 bloody hours, if not more, afterwards. So knight d4, trying to challenge that knight on e6, and generally speaking, blockading that isolated pawn makes a lot of sense. Maybe knights are going to get exchanged off, which I guess at this point both players don't mind. And yeah, knight b6, like I said, looking to get to that very tasty c5 square, which eventually happens. And now we get rook d1, a multi-purpose move. Not only do we want maybe long-term to have the rook behind that isolated pawn to pressure it some more, but also Nepo knows that knight c5 is inevitable at some point, attacking the pawn, attacking the queen, and the queen is bound to go away. And when the queen goes away, this knight on the d4, for example, if the queen isn't defending anymore, may get in slight trouble. So when knight c4, sorry, not knight c5, I screwed up my notation there. When knight c4 is played, and it did happen on the board, the queen can now very safely go to f2, the square that was reserved by f3 like 10 moves ago. And now we see the purpose, right? The rook is still there, protecting everything, keeping everything together. And now comes the crucial moment in the game. This is probably the last chance for Dane to make this game a bit more interesting, a bit sharper, and maybe try and push for a win. The move that is not the best, but definitely the most exciting, is knight takes a3. Now, don't forget that the knight isn't hanging or anything, because if the pawn were to take, this knight is no longer defended. So just takes, and Ding is straight up a pawn and is pretty much winning with minus 1.6. This, of course, will not happen. This is a dream variation. After knight takes on a3, the best move for Nepo would have been to just counter-strike in the center with e4, and this d5 pawn is now under tremendous pressure. And this position is about equal, maybe slightly favoring black, but black will not be able to hold on to the extra pawn for very much longer, because don't forget that this pawn is just, is not feeling very good. Now, the continuation of play would be something like knight back to c4. It kind of did its job. It understood that, this tactic is not going to happen, so there is no merit to having the knight on a3. Would rather have it back closer to the center. And now, very simple, regaining of the pawn with something like knight takes c5. Again, material is equal, position is equal. Maybe just a little bit slightly more exciting, because we've got this 2-to-1 queenside pawn majority that black can use in the future, and maybe try and create a passer and push for a win. However, this knight, on balance, is very annoying and will take some time to get rid of. However, what happened instead is just a very calm, the best move, don't get me wrong, rook a to c8. And honestly, this is a position where both players realize that it's just equal, and any moves that they make only can make this position worse. I don't think anyone can improve massively, unless we're talking some serious blunders. And very quickly, this game became a draw through repetition. Nepo played knight a4, attacking the queen. And also, now that the rook is here as well, it's even more dangerous to make the knight stay on c3. These ideas may still be possible in the future, so let's just get rid of that. Knight a4 attacking the queen retreats, rook f to e1. We had some very interesting dynamics for the rooks. It was like this, and then this as well. So rooks interchanged a lot, moved from file to file. We've got queen f6 now, a move that is meant to just, well, get the queen away from the file where the rook is, and maybe eyeing also that pawn on b2 by extension, putting more pressure on the central d4 knight. Why not? And this is the moment where Nepo decides, well, I don't want to lose that knight, so I'm just going to move it to b5. I don't want to lose that knight. Don't forget that the pawn on b2 is, although pressured a little bit by the queen, is well defended by the knight and the queen on f2. And this is basically where players started repeating. Knight c7, asking the question, what about trading here? You don't want to trade on d4? Maybe we can trade on b5. No. Knight back to d4, knight e6, knight b5, knight c7, knight d4, knight e6, repetition, draw. And yeah, so in the end, we got ourselves a game where Nepo felt like he doesn't need to push for anything. He's already a point up in the match. So if he draws every single game for the rest of the match, he's going to be very happy because, you know, all he needs to do now is never lose a game. And Ding felt that with black in this very equal position, it doesn't make too much sense to push his own agenda, trying to win. Maybe wait for a better chance again when you're playing the white pieces. And it wasn't really a game of any missed opportunities or big chances. Neither player was significantly better at any point in the game. It stayed equal all the time. At best, white at some point had like plus 0.4, plus 0.5, which is virtually nothing. So yeah, looking forward to game 4, and let me know in the comments below how many times you fell asleep during the game, and if you just happen to find this video useful, please like and subscribe, follow me on Twitch. I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays and Sundays. Find me on chess.com, join our Discord, all that good stuff, and I'm going to talk to you very soon. My favorite unintentional gambiters. Love you all, see ya in the next one.